4:17 a.m., April 23, 1942, the English Channel, 29 miles southwest of Plymouth. Deep within the steel belly of U-552, Lieutenant Commander Erich Topp stared intently at the battery gauge. 11%. The red needle trembled, dangerously close to the end of the scale. Above them, 8 British destroyers circled like sharks, smelling blood. The depth charges of the last 4 hours had buckled the U-boat's pressure hull, loosened rivets, and stretched the nerves of the 44-man crew to the breaking point. But the worst part was the battery. With every breath, every second underwater, the charge sank lower. In less than an hour, the electric motors would fail. Then they would have to surface, right into the guns of the waiting destroyers, unless Topp could find a way out, an impossible way. On this April night in 1942, 27-year-old Erich Topp faced the hardest decision of his life. UBV-52, the Red Devil, as the boat was known because of its grinning devil mascot, had sunk 8 Allied ships in the last 3 weeks. Over 45,000 gross registered tons lay at the bottom of the sea. But every success in the U-boat war came at a price. The British were furious. Their destroyers hunted U-552 with a tenacity Topp had never seen before. And now, after 14 hours of relentless pursuit, U-552 was at the end of its rope. Almost at the end. Topp was no ordinary U-boat commander. Born on July 2, 1914 in Hanover, he joined the German Navy in 1934, barely 20 years old, full of idealism and a sense of duty. He had volunteered for U-boats when most of his comrades preferred the surface fleet. U-boats were considered a death sentence, confined spaces, months-long patrols, fear of the deep and of death, but Topp saw it differently. U-boats were the ultimate challenge. Every man on board had to function perfectly or they all died. This clarity fascinated him. With 35 ships sunk and over 197,000 gross registered tons to his name, he was the third most successful U-boat commander in the German Navy. Only Otto Kretschmer and Wolfgang Luth had sunk more, but numbers didn't tell the whole story. Kretschmer had been captured in 1941. Luth operated in the Indian Ocean against weaker defenses. Topp fought in the Atlantic, the toughest theater against the Royal Navy's best, and he survived. That was perhaps his greatest achievement. Survival. But numbers meant nothing when you were trapped in a steel coffin 300 feet beneath the surface, surrounded by enemies, with a battery that could fail at any moment. U-552 was a Type 7C U-boat, 220 feet long, 20 feet wide, with a steel pressure hull that would be crushed like a soda can at 650 feet. The crew of 44 men lived in incredibly tight quarters. The bunks were shared in shifts, 3 men, 1 bunk. When one was awake, another slept in it. The smell was indescribable. Sweat, diesel, foul air, human effluvia. After weeks at sea, you could smell a U-boat sailor from 300 feet away. What set Topp apart was not his aggression in attack, but his ice-cold calm in despair. He had developed an ability that few possessed, to completely shut down emotions. In the most critical moments, when other men panicked, Topp became colder, more focused. His crew called him the Ice Bear because his nerves never seemed to fail. Lieutenant Fisher once said, "I've seen Topp through over 300 depth charge attacks. Never a tremor, never a bead of sweat. I don't think he has a normal human nervous system." But in this moment, staring at the battery gauge at 11%, with 8 destroyers overhead, even Topp felt a sliver of doubt creeping in. Not fear of death. Topp had seen death too often to fear it anymore. But responsibility. 44 men trusted him. 44 families waited at home. 44 lives depended on his next decision. This burden was heavier than any depth charge. The English Channel in April 1942 was a witch's brew. After the success of Operation Drumbeat, where German U-boats had wreaked havoc off the American East Coast, the Royal Navy had massively reinforced its defenses. New destroyers, better sonar technology, more aggressive tactics. The days of easy hunting were over. Topp knew that. But U-552 had orders: disrupt convoys, sink supplies, force Britain to surrender. So, the Red Devil had entered the English Channel, fired its torpedoes, and was now caught in a web of steel and explosives. The pursuit had begun at 2:23 p.m. the previous day. U-552 had just sunk the freighter SS Glen Lee with 2 torpedoes, 4,174 gross registered tons, when suddenly the ping of sonar echoed through the hull. A destroyer. Then 2. Within minutes, there were 4. Topp had given the standard order: alarm, dive to 400 feet. But the destroyers were prepared. The first depth charges exploded before U-552 had reached a safe depth. What followed were 14 hours that the crew of U-552 would never forget. For anyone who has never experienced a depth charge attack, it's impossible to understand the terror. Imagine sitting in a metal tube, 300 feet underwater, unable to see anything, only hear. Above you, death circles. You hear the ping of the sonar, a metallic echo that vibrates through the hull. You know they've found you. Then the sound of the destroyers accelerating right above you. The roar of the screws grows louder, louder, unbearable. You know what's coming. The depth charges fall. For 3, 4, 5 seconds you hear nothing. You wait. Every man holds his breath. Then, the explosion. A Mark 7 depth charge contained 286 pounds of Amatol explosive. Underwater, the pressure wave spread at 5,000 feet per second. The sound wasn't like an explosion on land. It was a brutal, all-encompassing whoomp that shook your entire body. The lights flickered. Cork material from the walls rained down like snow. Men were thrown off their feet if the bomb was close enough. Pipes burst. Valves leaked. And always the fear. Was that close enough? Would the next one be closer? The destroyers worked as a pack, coordinated, merciless. HMS Vortigern as the lead ship directed the others. HMS Witchett from the north. HMS Mackay from the south. The others fanned out, forming a net. Whenever the sonar lost them, others picked up the hunt. They dropped depth charges in patterns, scientifically calculated to cover the maximum area. 5 charge salvos, 10 bombs at once. The seabed trembled like an earthquake. British anti-submarine warfare had improved dramatically since 1939. ASDIC, the underwater detection device, could now spot U-boats at distances of over 2,000 meters. Modern hydrophone operators, highly trained specialists, could hear and identify every sound. The characteristic hum of the German electric motors, the clatter of the pumps, the creaking of the pressure hull under strain, even breathing, if the crew wasn't absolutely still. A single mistake, a dropped tool, a valve closed too loudly, and the destroyers had their position. On U-552, every sound became a potential death sentence. Topp had ordered silence, absolute silence. Men moved in slow motion, every movement deliberate. Breathing became shallow and controlled. Conversations only in whispers when absolutely necessary. In the engine room, Lieutenant Fisher shut down non-essential systems. Every motor, every pump that could be switched off was. U-552 became a ghost ship, gliding through the depths, almost silent, almost invisible, but not invisible enough. Chief Petty Officer Klaus Weber, 34 years old, a veteran of 15 patrols, monitored the batteries with the precision of a watchmaker. Every amp counted. He had shut down all non-essential systems. No heating, even though it was -4 degrees Celsius inside the boat. No ventilation. The air was getting increasingly thick, full of carbon dioxide. Only the electric motors on minimal power, just enough to maintain steerage. And the pumps, to keep the water out. The water that seeped through 100 tiny leaks. At 04 hours, Weber came to Topp in the control room. His face was grey with exhaustion. "Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, so the others wouldn't hear. "At the current rate of consumption, we have 47 minutes left, then the batteries are dead." Topp nodded. No emotion. He had already calculated this number. Above him, visible through the periscope that he had only dared to raise for seconds at a time, circled the shadows of the destroyers. 8 ships. He had counted them: HMS Vortigern, HMS Whitshed, HMS Mackay, and 5 more. Over 40 guns, hundreds of depth charges, thousands of men, all with one goal: to destroy U-552. The odds were mathematically calculable. They were 0. But then Topp saw something on the nautical chart that made him pause. 10 kilometers northeast of their position lay a known minefield, British, Type Mark 17 bottom mines, laid to protect the approaches to Portsmouth. The minefields were marked on the U-boat charts with a large red triangle and the warning, "Absolutely avoid." Even the British ships didn't pass through it, but sailed around the field. The mines were magnetically and acoustically triggered, each with 227 kilograms of explosives. A single explosion would tear U-552 to pieces. But Topp saw something that others didn't. The mines were designed for large ships, destroyers and freighters, that moved at high speed and had strong magnetic signatures. A U-boat, crawling slowly, almost motionless, with minimal magnetic disturbance, could theoretically make it through. Theoretically. Nobody had ever tried it, because it was suicide. But the alternative was guaranteed suicide. Topp called his officers together. Lieutenant Werner von Schrader, the first watch officer, Lieutenant Hans Fischer, chief engineer, Chief Petty Officer Fritz Krüger, the most sure-handed helmsman in the German Navy. He showed them the chart, the mines, the plan. The men stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Von Schrader opened his mouth, then closed it again. Fischer, usually the most pragmatic, slowly shook his head. "Lieutenant Commander," he said finally, "the magnetic detonators." Topp interrupted him. "We have 40 minutes of battery left. 8 destroyers above us. If anyone has a better idea, I'm open to it." Nobody said anything. "Good," said Topp. "Then we'll do it." What followed was the most precise navigational feat ever performed underwater. Topp had to maneuver U-552 exactly to the edge of the minefield, without the destroyers realizing where he was headed. With only 11% battery remaining, every course correction meant a compromise between speed and consumption. Too fast, and the battery died before reaching the target. Too slow, and the destroyers would wear them down with depth charges. Topp calculated every meter and every minute. At 04:42 hours, they reached the edge of the minefield. Topp raised the periscope for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which British radar operators could have detected it. 3 seconds to confirm their position. The shadows of the buoys marking the minefield were visible. They had arrived. Topp retracted the periscope and gave the order that would define the next few hours. Both electric motors on absolute minimum power, speed under 2 knots, absolute silence throughout the boat. Nobody speaks, nobody moves unnecessarily. We're going through. The crew of U-552 had survived many impossible situations. But as the boat slowly glided into the minefield, there was a silence that frightened even seasoned veterans. Every man knew: one wrong noise, a minimal course deviation, an unexpected current, and 227 kilograms of explosives would obliterate them. Fisher, the engineer, had minimized all sources of noise. The pumps were running at the slowest speed. The water that seeped through the leaks was collecting in the bilge. It would be pumped out manually later. Now only silence mattered. The first 10 minutes were the worst. Not because of the physical danger, although that was real enough, but because of the psychological strain. Every man in U-552 knew where they were, in the minefield, surrounded by hundreds of tons of explosives, designed to destroy exactly what they were: a Type 7EC U-boat. The thought was simple. A mine detonates. The pressure hull ruptures. Water rushes in with the force of a hurricane. The boat sinks uncontrollably. At 200 meters, the hull implodes. 44 men die in fractions of a second, crushed by thousands of tons of water pressure. No time to pray, no time to think of home. Only sudden, absolute annihilation. Seaman Hans Müller, the youngest on board at just 18 years old, sat in the bow section, trembling uncontrollably, not from the cold, although it was -7 degrees Celsius in the boat, from fear. He had a letter in his pocket, from his mother, which he read in every spare moment. "Dear Hans," she wrote, "I pray every day for your safe return. Your father is proud of you. Come home to us." In that moment, Hans thought he would never see them again. Boatswain Carl Schmidt, 42, a grizzled veteran with graying hair and scars from 3 sunken ships, placed a hand on Hans's shoulder. Quietly, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "Stay calm, kid. The old man knows what he's doing. Topp's saved us 100 times. He'll do it again." The British destroyers above them realized the U-boat had vanished. The sonar pinging became more frantic, searching, desperate. They ran patterns, circles, spirals, but they weren't getting any closer. They knew exactly where U-552 had disappeared, on the edge of the minefield. The hydrophone operators had pinpointed the last echo, but following into the minefield was impossible. On the destroyers, a heated discussion erupted. The commander of the hunting group, Commander Richard Stokes on the HMS Vortigern, a seasoned veteran with 47 U-boat kills to his name, faced the same decision as Topp: follow or give up. He consulted his officers. Lieutenant Commander David Thompson, the navigation officer, pointed at the map. "Minefield AJ-47, sir. Marked 16 bottom mines, magnetically and acoustically triggered. We laid them ourselves. No ship can get through there without setting off at least 3 mines." Stokes stared at the map. He wanted this U-boat. U-552, the Red Devil, had sunk the USS Reuben James, the first American destroyer of the war. Erich Topp was a prize target, one of the most wanted U-boat commanders. But for the destroyers, it was simpler than for Topp. They had other U-boats to hunt, other convoys to protect. Following some crazy German commander into a minefield was strategically pointless, and frankly, nobody believed Topp would survive. The minefield would finish him more efficiently and more safely than any depth charge. Stokes made the decision. Abort the hunt. All units returned to convoy escort duty. As the order went through the fleet, Thompson shook his head. "Brave or crazy, sir." Stokes smiled bitterly. "With the Germans, it's often the same thing." At 05:03 hours, the destroyers turned away, all 8 of them. The sounds of their screws receded, grew fainter, vanished. In U-552, the crew heard it. The destroyer noise that had terrorized them for 14 hours was gone. Some men breathed a sigh of relief, but the seasoned veterans knew better. The destroyers were gone because they believed U-552 would die in the minefield. The real test was just beginning. But for U-552, the danger was only beginning. The minefield stretched for 12 kilometers. At 2 knots, the crossing would take 6 hours. The battery had only 32 minutes left. It was mathematically impossible. But Topp had one more trick. He ordered the boat to sink to 95 meters just above the muddy seabed. Then he gave the order that shocked even Fisher. All engines off, complete stop. U-552 sank slowly until her keel gently touched the seabed, 95 meters deep, surrounded by mines. No engines, no movement, total silence. Topp had put the boat into a state U-boat men called playing dead, like an animal playing dead to fool predators. But this time, the predators were mines. That reacted to magnetic and acoustic signatures. A resting U-boat on the seabed had minimal signatures. It was almost invisible. But the price was high. Without engines, there was no ventilation. Carbon dioxide levels rose rapidly. Without heating, the temperature continued to drop. Within 30 minutes, the internal temperature was -7 degrees Celsius. The men were shivering uncontrollably, but nobody dared speak. Topp had ordered, "Every man breathe slowly and shallowly. Conserve oxygen. Don't move." The carbon dioxide content became dangerous. Over 4% in the air. Men got headaches, nausea, dizziness. Over 8%, they would lose consciousness. Over 10%, they would die. At 07:30 hours, after 2 hours and 27 minutes on the seabed, the situation was critical. 3 men had fainted. Others were hallucinating. Weber, the chief engineer, reported to Topp in a whispering voice, "Sir, we need air." Topp nodded. He had known this moment would come. He gave the order. "Start engines. Minimal power. Ascend to periscope depth. Snorkel up." The risk was immense. The snorkel, a device that allowed U-boats to run diesel engines underwater and draw in fresh air, protruded above the surface. It could be detected by radar. But more than the noise of the diesel engines could trigger a nearby mine. Topp had no choice. They would die of carbon dioxide poisoning in 20 minutes. He had to take the chance. The electric motors hummed quietly. U-552 rose from the seabed, slowly, centimeter by centimeter. Fisher controlled the ascent with the precision of a neurosurgeon. 95 meters, 80 meters, 60 meters. At 45 meters, he stopped, too deep for the snorkel. Further, 30 meters, 20 meters, 15 meters, periscope depth. Topp extended. The snorkel. The mechanical sound was deafening in the silent boat. Every man held his breath. No explosion. The mines hadn't reacted. The diesel engines coughed, then started. The noise was terrifying in this steel tube. But with the noise came air, fresh. Salty sea air streamed into the boat. Men breathed greedily, almost desperately. The carbon dioxide levels began to fall. And while the diesel engines ran, they charged the batteries. From 7% to 9% to 12%. Every percent was worth gold. After 40 minutes, Weber had brought the batteries up to 18%. It was enough, just barely. Topp gave the order. Snorkel down, diesels off, E-motors minimal power. We continue, but the 40 minutes at periscope depth with the snorkel running had attracted attention, not from the destroyers, who were long gone, but from a British reconnaissance aircraft, a Sunderland that routinely patrolled the coast. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant James Morrison, saw the snorkel for exactly 7 seconds before it disappeared. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe wreckage, maybe flotsam, but protocol was protocol. He radioed the position to base. Within 30 minutes, 2 destroyers, HMS Blankney and HMS Grove, were heading back. Top knew nothing of this. U-552 continued to crawl through the minefield, blind, deaf, almost dead. Navigation was now an art, without GPS, without sight, only with compass, depth gauge, and Top's instinct. He calculated currents, estimated drift, corrected minimally, 1 degree too far east. And they would drive into an area where the mines lay thicker, 1 degree too far west. And they would drift out of the minefield's protection. Right back to the destroyers. The corridor was only 200 meters wide. Top had to hit it blind. At 11:15 a.m., almost 7 hours after entering the minefield, Kruger, the depth rudder operator, felt a change. The seabed was dropping away. They were at the edge. Top cautiously raised the periscope. 3 seconds. What he saw made his heart stop. 2 destroyers, less than 2 kilometers away, were crisscrossing in front of them. They were searching. But they were searching in the wrong place, too far south. U-552 had emerged from the minefield to the north, a navigational masterpiece. Top retracted the periscope. New route, northeast, towards open sea, away from the destroyers. The next 3 hours were a waiting game. U-552 crept northeast, using the last of its battery power. The destroyers continued their search to the south. At 2:30 p.m., 24 hours after the pursuit began, Top dared to come up to periscope depth. The horizon was empty. No destroyers, no ships, just waves. They had done it. Against all odds, against every shred of military logic. They had survived. Top ordered U-552 to surface. The hatches opened. Men climbed onto the bridge, breathing fresh air, seeing sunlight for the first time in a day. Some were weeping, others were laughing hysterically. The tension of 24 hours of mortal combat released. But Top remained calm. He noted in the war diary, April 23rd, 24th, 1942, 8 hours of pursuit by 8 destroyers, battery critically low, 11%, escape through British Minefield Square, AJ-47, no friendly casualties, boat damaged but functional. He didn't mention the impossible navigation, not the 14 hours of absolute silence, not the fact that he had done something no U-boat commander had ever dared to do. For Top, it was just another patrol. The British Admiralty didn't learn what had happened until weeks later. The reports from the destroyer commanders were frustrated. U-boat escaped, presumed sunk by minefield. But when U-552 returned to port and sank more ships, they realized the truth. The German U-boat had sailed through their own minefield. Royal Navy analysts considered it a navigational error. No one would deliberately do something like that. They didn't understand Erich Topp. Topp continued his career with the same mix of aggressiveness and ice-cold calculation. By the end of the war, he had sunk 35 ships, totaling 197,160 gross registered tons. He received the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, the 17th member of the Wehrmacht to receive this honor. But of all his successes, all the sinkings, all the awards, it was the night of April 23rd, 24th, 1942, that his crew never forgot. The night they crawled through hell and came out on the other side. Klaus Weber, the chief engineer, wrote in his memoirs years after the war, "In 3 years of U-boat warfare, I saw things no man should ever see. I saw ships burning, heard men drowning, watched comrades die. But nothing, absolutely nothing compares to those 14 hours in the minefield. We were technically dead, the battery dead, the air dead, our chances dead. But Topp found a way. He always found a way." The story of U-552's escape became a legend in the U-boat arm. Young commanders studied Topp's tactics. How could one man survive something like that? The answer was complex. It wasn't just skill, although Topp's navigational abilities were extraordinary. It wasn't just courage, although the decision to enter the minefield was insanely brave. It was a combination of technical understanding, psychological strength, and something that was hard to put into words: the ability to remain calm in absolute desperation. Modern submarine academies around the world still teach the principles Topp demonstrated: battery management under extreme conditions, navigation in enemy waters without modern aids, psychological leadership of a crew on the verge of panic. But what they can't teach is what Topp had inside him: the willingness to attempt the impossible when the possible leads to death. The irony of the story is that the British mines designed to destroy German U-boats ended up saving a German U-boat. The magnetic and acoustic detonators, so sensitively calibrated, were too sensitive. They reacted to fast, large targets. A slowly creeping U-boat, almost motionless, fell below their detection threshold. The British had created a gap in their own defense, and Erich Topp, with the audacity of a desperate man and the precision of a genius, had found that gap and exploited it. After the war, Topp served in the German Navy and later with NATO, reaching the rank of Rear Admiral. His post-war career was remarkable. He helped rebuild the new German Navy, bringing his experience but also a new philosophy. "The war," he once said in a 1978 interview, "taught me that courage without humanity is barbarism. We were soldiers, not monsters. That distinction is important." He rarely spoke about his war experiences. The 35 sunken ships, the awards, the fame, it all seemed to make him uncomfortable. When a reporter asked him in 1995 if he was proud of his records, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I'm proud that most of my men survived. The rest is just history." That answer said more about Erich Topp than 1,000 war diaries. The crew of U-552 had an unusually high survival rate. Of the 44 men who sailed through the minefield that April night in 1942, 41 survived the war. In a time when 3 out of 4 U-boat men died, that was exceptional. It wasn't an accident. Topp didn't take unnecessary risks. He fought aggressively, but smartly. He sank ships, but he brought his men home. That was his true legacy. Klaus Weber, the chief engineer, opened a small workshop in Hanover after the war. He repaired engines, lived a simple life. On the wall of his office hung a single photograph, U-552, taken in 1943, the crew on the deck, young and smiling, unaware of the horrors that were yet to come. When customers asked about the photo, Weber sometimes told the story, not the whole story, just fragments. The night in the minefield, the 11% battery, the belief they were going to die. And then, he always said with a small smile, "Topp saved us, as always." Topp himself died in 2005 at the age of 91. At his funeral in Kiel, former crew members of U-552 were present, old men now, some in wheelchairs, others using walkers. But all had come to pay their last respects to their commander. They wore no uniform, they gave no speeches. They simply stood there, reverent, silent, united by memories that outsiders could never understand. After the ceremony, they sat together, perhaps for the last time. Hank Miller, who at 18 once trembled with fear, was now 81. Carl Schmidt, the old boatswain, had long been dead, fallen in 1944. But the survivors remembered. They spoke little about the war, about the sinkings, about the dead. That was too painful. But when they did speak, they always mentioned the night in the minefield, the night of April 23rd, 1942, the night the Red Devil rode through hell and survived, the night they learned what leadership really meant. The night that defined their lives. A reporter asked Miller in 2007, 2 years after Topp's death, "What was the most important thing you learned from Lieutenant Commander Topp?" Miller thought for a long time. Then he said, "That despair is no excuse to give up, that the impossible is only impossible until someone does it, that a good leader never abandons his men, no matter how bad the odds are." Topp could have led us out of the minefield when the battery was at 18%. We could have surfaced, surrendered, but he got us all the way through. All of us. That was Erich Topp. The story of U-552 is more than a war story. It's a story about human limits, about decisions under the most extreme pressure, about the responsibility that a leader carries, about the power of will when all seems lost. These lessons are timeless. They apply today just as they did in 1942. These stories disappear with each generation. The last eyewitnesses are gone. The U-boats are wrecks or museums, but the lessons remain. If this historical truth is important to you, then support with YouTube Super Thanks. Every contribution allows me to travel to archives, to digitize war diaries, to secure the last documents. These men, their actions, their sufferings, deserve to be remembered, not as glorification, but as a testament to what humans are capable of under extreme pressure. What impressed you most about this story? Many viewers have shared family stories, grandfathers who were U-boat sailors, letters from the war front, memories that have lasted generations. Share your story below. Every comment is a piece of history that we can preserve together, because these moments, these decisions, these men must never be forgotten.